The Arizona sun had a strange way of painting everything gold and red. In the late afternoon, the land looked endless. Miles of open fields, dry brush, and fences that stretched until they disappeared into the horizon. On one of those stretches of land stood an old ranch house, its wooden porch creaking every time the wind passed. That was the home of Samuel Dwyer, a man who had learned to live with silence. Samuel was 64 years old, tall but slightly bent from years of hard work. His hands were rough, his eyes sharp but tired, and his heart was quieter than it used to be. He had been a rancher all his life. The land was in his blood, from his father and grandfather before him. But after his wife Clara passed away, everything seemed to lose color. Each morning, Samuel woke before sunrise. He fed the horses, checked the fences, and drank his coffee on the porch while the sky slowly changed from black to orange. It was a routine, steady, familiar, and lonely. He didn't mind the quiet most days. But sometimes, when he passed by the small garden Clara had planted, he felt an ache so deep it stopped him in his tracks. The garden was still there, though overgrown. Clara had loved roses even though they never grew well in the dry soil. If they bloom even once, it's worth the effort, she used to say. Samuel couldn't bring himself to pull the plants out, so he watered them when he remembered, not because he thought they'd bloom, but because it felt wrong to let them die completely. The nearby town of Hollister Creek was small. People there knew each other, but Samuel rarely went anymore. He'd go once a week for supplies, flour, coffee, a few canned goods. The shopkeeper, Mrs. Jensen, always asked, "How are you holding up, Sam?" And he always answered, "Doing fine." It was the same answer every time, even though everyone knew he wasn't. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Samuel noticed something strange. Out beyond the fence, near the edge of his land, were three figures walking slowly through the dust. He shaded his eyes, squinting. They were coming closer, not on horseback, just walking with bags slung over their shoulders. He thought maybe they were travelers or workers from another ranch who'd lost their way. He waited by the gate as they approached. The closer they got, the clearer he could see. Three young women, their clothes worn from travel, their faces tired and covered in dust. They looked like they hadn't eaten properly in days. When they reached the gate, the tallest one, with long black hair tied back in a braid, stepped forward. "Sir," she said, her voice soft but steady, "we're sorry to bother you. We've been walking for a long time. We don't want to cause any trouble. We just need some water." Samuel hesitated. He didn't get many visitors, and three strangers showing up at dusk was unusual. He looked from one to the other. They were clearly sisters, the same sharp cheekbones, the same deep brown eyes. Their clothes told him they were Apache, from one of the nearby reservations. The oldest introduced herself as Naya, and her sisters were Tika and Lona. Naya spoke for them while the other two stood quietly behind her. Samuel looked down the road. It was empty. No horses, no wagon, just the long dirt path fading into the distance. "Where are you coming from?" he asked. "South," Naya said softly. "Our people had to leave. The water wells went dry. We've been looking for work." "For food?" Samuel rubbed the back of his neck. He wasn't sure what to do. The world wasn't always kind to travelers, and not everyone in the nearby town treated the Apache kindly. He'd seen it before. Harsh looks, cold shoulders, whispered words. But he also saw the hunger in their eyes, the exhaustion in their walk. He motioned toward the water pump near the barn. "You can drink there," he said. The sisters thanked him and hurried to the pump. Samuel watched as they took turns drinking, filling a small tin cup and passing it between them. Lona, the youngest, couldn't have been more than 16. Her hands shook as she poured water on her face, letting the dust run down her neck. After a few minutes, Naya walked back toward Samuel. "Thank you," she said again. "We don't ask for charity. We can work, cook, clean, take care of animals, anything. We'll work, cook, and serve. Just let us stay a while." Her words caught him off guard. They were humble but not begging. It was a kind of plea that came from pride, from people who didn't want to take, only to earn. Samuel stayed quiet for a moment, thinking. He didn't have anyone on the ranch anymore. His last ranch hand left months ago to find work closer to town. The chores were piling up. The house needed cleaning. But letting three strangers stay, three young women, could bring gossip. People talked in small towns. Still, he looked at them again, Their shoes were worn through. Their faces had that tired, sunburned look that only came from walking under the desert sun too long. And when Naya's eyes met his, he saw something. Not fear, not pity, but quiet strength. He finally nodded. "You can stay for the night," he said. "There's a small cabin by the barn. It's old, but it's got a roof." The sisters looked at each other with relief and gratitude. Tika smiled, the first real smile Samuel had seen in days. They thanked him again and followed him toward the barn. The cabin was dusty and needed sweeping, but the three of them didn't complain. They cleaned it right away, shaking out old blankets and sweeping the floor. Samuel brought them a loaf of bread, some beans, and a few apples from his pantry. They thanked him again, and he could tell by how quickly the food disappeared that they hadn't eaten a real meal in days. That night, Samuel sat on his porch again, sipping coffee under the wide desert sky. The stars were bright, scattered like dust across black velvet. He could hear faint laughter from the cabin, soft, gentle, almost musical. It had been a long time since laughter had come from anywhere near his house. He thought about Clara. She had always been kind to travelers, always believed in helping those in need. "When someone knocks on," she used to say, "you don't ask where they came from. You ask how you can help." Samuel smiled at the memory. Maybe, he thought, this was the right thing to do. Before going inside, he walked out to the barn one last time. He saw the sisters already asleep, huddled together under a thin blanket. The lantern beside them was almost out, flickering faintly. Samuel quietly set down an old quilt from his house, Clara's quilt, near the door. He didn't say anything, just left it there and walked back to the house. For the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel completely empty. The night air felt a little warmer, the silence a little softer. When Samuel went to bed, he thought about what the next day might bring. He didn't know how long they would stay, or what the neighbors might say. But for that night, he didn't care. He just knew that the house, his quiet, lonely home, had found a heartbeat again. And somewhere deep inside, a part of him he thought was gone. The part that once cared, once believed in people, had started to wake up. The next morning began with a golden sunrise stretching over the dry hills. Samuel woke up earlier than usual. He wasn't sure why. Maybe because he heard faint sounds outside, the kind that didn't belong to the usual quiet of his ranch. When he stepped onto the porch, he saw the three sisters already awake. They were by the barn, fetching water and scrubbing old wooden buckets with strong, quick hands. The youngest, Lona, was humming softly as she worked, her voice carrying across the yard like a gentle tune. Samuel stood there for a moment, watching quietly. It had been years since anyone else had moved around his land with that kind of energy. He walked over slowly. "You're up early," he said. Naya turned, smiling politely. "The sun doesn't wait for anyone," she replied. "We thought we'd start helping before you told us what needs doing." Samuel scratched his beard and nodded. "Well, that's fine by me. The horses need feeding, and there's a fence down by the east line that needs checking. I usually take care of it myself, but..." Before he could finish, Tika said, "We can help with that, too. We've done fence work before." He raised an eyebrow, half surprised and half amused. "You've done fence work?" "Yes, sir," Tika said, smiling a little. "Our father taught us. He said we should learn everything a man knows so no one could ever say we weren't capable." Samuel couldn't help but grin. "Sounds like a wise man." That day, the ranch felt different. The sisters worked with steady hands and quiet focus. They cleaned the barn, gathered feed, and brushed the horses until their coats shone. Samuel noticed how gently they treated the animals. Not rushing, not shouting, just calm and patient. Even his oldest mare, Daisy, who didn't like strangers, let Lona stroke her muzzle without pulling away. By noon, the kitchen smelled like home again. The sisters had cooked. Nothing fancy, just beans, cornbread, and a stew made with whatever they could find in Samuel's pantry. But when he tasted it, it reminded him of something he hadn't felt in years: comfort. After lunch, Samuel sat on the porch while Naya mended one of his old shirts. The afternoon sun was bright and the air buzzed with the sound of crickets. He looked at the three of them moving around his yard, busy, cheerful, and full of life, and felt something loosen inside him. For so long, he had lived as if the world had ended when Clara died. But now, he realized the world had just been waiting for him to open the door again. Over the next few days, the sisters fell into a rhythm on the ranch. They worked hard and never complained. Tika repaired tools that Samuel had left broken for months. Lona fed the chickens and collected eggs, singing softly to them as she worked. And Naya took charge of the house, cleaning every corner until the old place looked almost new again. At night, they would all sit by the porch fire. Samuel would tell stories about the old days, how he and Clara built the ranch together from almost nothing, how they rode through storms and heat and still laughed through it all. In return, Naya shared stories of their tribe, about the river that once flowed near their home, the songs their mother used to sing, and how they learned to live with less when the land grew harsh. It was during those evenings that Samuel realized something he hadn't noticed before. The sisters didn't just bring work and help to his life. They brought peace. Their presence softened the hard edges of his loneliness, but not everyone saw it that way. One afternoon, Samuel went into town to buy more supplies. Mrs. Jensen, the shopkeeper, greeted him with her usual smile, but this time it felt a little different. "Sam," she said carefully, "I heard you've got company out there." "3 young women, is that right?" Samuel paused, setting a bag of flour on the counter. "That's right," he said. "They're helping out on the ranch." Mrs. Jensen hesitated before replying. "You be careful, Sam. Folks around here talk. You know how they are." He sighed. "I know, but they're good people. Hard workers. That's all there is to it." She gave a small nod but didn't look convinced. "Just be ready for questions, that's all I'll say." By the time Samuel rode back home, the words still echoed in his head. He didn't care much for gossip, but he knew how small towns worked. People loved stories, especially the kind that weren't theirs to tell. When he reached the ranch, the sisters were outside, hanging clothes to dry. The sunlight caught the fabric, turning it bright white against the blue sky. Naya noticed the look on his face right away. "Everything all right?" she asked. He gave a small smile. "Just town talk," he said. "Nothing worth worrying about." She nodded, though she understood more than he said. She'd seen that kind of suspicion before, the kind that followed her people wherever they went. Still, she didn't let it show. Instead, she asked what else needed to be done that day. As days turned to weeks, life settled into something peaceful again. Samuel started to rely on them more, not out of need, but because he wanted to. He found himself looking forward to Lona's songs, to Tika's laughter, to Naya's quiet way of keeping everything in order. One evening, when the sky turned pink and gold, Samuel found Naya sitting by the corral, watching the horses. She looked thoughtful, her dark hair shining in the fading light. "You've all done more for this place than I ever expected," he said, standing beside her. "It's starting to feel alive again." Naya smiled faintly. "It was always alive," she said. "It just needed a little care." He nodded slowly. "Maybe that's true for people too." She looked at him for a moment, then turned back to the horses. "Maybe it is." That night, when Samuel sat alone on the porch, he realized something important. It wasn't pity that had made him open his gate that first night. It was instinct. Something inside him had recognized goodness when he saw it. And though the world might not understand, he knew he had done the right thing. In the following days, the sisters began fixing things he hadn't even thought about. They mended the old quilt, polished the furniture, and even replanted the garden Clara once loved. Samuel watched quietly as Naya knelt in the dirt, pressing her palms gently against the dry soil. "She planted roses here," he said softly. Naya smiled. "Then we'll plant them again," and they did. The next morning, all 3 sisters worked together, planting new rose cuttings near the porch. Samuel helped too, his old hands moving slower than theirs but still strong. When they finished, the earth looked fresh, ready to bloom again. That evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Samuel felt something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. The air seemed warmer, the silence less heavy. He knew life wouldn't be simple. There would be whispers, maybe even challenges ahead. But he also knew one thing for sure: the moment he had opened that gate, something beautiful had entered his world. For the first time since Clara's passing, Samuel felt that the ranch and his heart were no longer empty. And somewhere deep inside, he hoped the sisters would never have to leave. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch had begun to feel alive again, full of movement, laughter, and small moments of joy that Samuel had long forgotten. The three sisters, Naya, Tika, and Lona, had settled into a rhythm, waking before sunrise, tending the animals, and keeping the house in order. Samuel found himself watching them sometimes, marveling at the way they worked together seamlessly, like they had done it all their lives. Naya often took charge of the kitchen. She would wake early to prepare breakfast, filling the house with the smell of cornbread, warm beans, and fresh coffee. Samuel, who had spent years eating simple meals of canned food or leftovers, now found himself savoring every bite, enjoying not only the food, but the care that went into it. He began to understand that the sisters' presence wasn't just about help. It was about restoring life, warmth and meaning to a place that had been silent for far too long. Tika, meanwhile, had become Samuel's shadow in the fields. She repaired fences, mended tools, and even helped him train the younger horses. Samuel noticed the way she handled the animals, firm yet gentle, patient and understanding. He found himself learning from her again, realizing that even after decades of experience, there was still much he could learn about kindness, patience, and trust. Lona, the youngest, had a way of bringing a smile to everyone's face. She sang softly as she worked, her voice delicate and cheerful, lifting the spirits of those around her. Even Samuel, who had grown used to solitude and the quiet hum of the desert, found himself humming along, feeling a lightness in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Despite the growing harmony on the ranch, the world outside was not as forgiving. One afternoon, as Samuel rode into town to fetch supplies, he noticed a few people whispering and glancing his way. The small-town curiosity that he had once ignored now felt sharper, heavier. He overheard bits of conversation, people questioning why three young Apache women were living on a ranch alone with a man their age, wondering what kind of arrangement this could possibly be. Samuel tried to ignore the whispers, telling himself it didn't matter. But deep down, he knew the small town had a way of magnifying every story, twisting it into something more than it was. He walked into Mrs. Jensen's shop and greeted her politely, trying to focus on the flour and sugar he needed. "Samuel," she said quietly, glancing around. "People are talking. I don't want you to get in trouble." He placed the items on the counter, his face calm. "I appreciate the warning, but there's nothing to worry about. They're hard workers, that's all. I trust them, and that's enough for me." Mrs. Jensen's eyes softened, but she didn't press further. Samuel left the shop carrying the supplies with a sense of determination. He wasn't about to let gossip drive him to turn away the only company he had known in years. When he returned to the ranch, he saw the sisters working in the garden. The roses they had planted weeks ago were beginning to bloom, small buds of red and pink dotting the otherwise dry landscape. Lona waved at him, her smile bright against the sunlight. "They're beautiful," Samuel said, walking toward them. Naya looked up, brushing dirt from her hands. "Just like the ones your wife planted," she said softly. Samuel's throat tightened at the words. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment, and then bent down to inspect a budding rose. "She would have loved this," he whispered. The sisters continued their work, tending the plants with care and precision. They cleared weeds, watered the flowers, and pruned the branches gently. Samuel watched, feeling a warmth that was both comforting and bittersweet. Clara had been gone for years, but in a way, these young women were helping him keep her memory alive. As the weeks went on, Samuel grew more protective of the sisters. He realized that they were more than just helpers. They were family. He found himself worrying about them in ways he hadn't thought possible, fearing the judgments and prejudices of people who didn't know them. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the ranch, Samuel sat on the porch with Naya. They watched Tika and Lona as they gathered eggs from the chicken coop. Samuel took a deep breath and spoke. "Naya," he began, "I know people in town talk. They don't understand you girls. But I want you to know, no matter what anyone says, this place is yours as much as it is mine. You're safe here." Naya looked at him, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "Thank you, Samuel. That means a lot. We just want to work and live in peace. That's all we've ever wanted." He nodded, feeling a sense of responsibility heavier than he had expected. "Then that's what you'll have. I won't let anyone make it hard for you." The bond between them deepened further when a sudden summer storm swept across the valley. The winds howled and the rain poured down, drenching the fields and threatening to flood the garden. Samuel was outside, securing the horses and checking the fences, but the sisters were right there with him, moving quickly to protect what they could. Naya guided the horses into the barn. Tika gathered tools and supplies, and Lona held the smaller animals close, keeping them calm. Despite the chaos, they worked together with an unspoken understanding, each action careful, deliberate, and purposeful. Samuel felt a surge of pride. They were capable, brave, and resilient, qualities that reminded him of Clara and many other strong women he had known in his life. When the storm finally passed, the ranch was muddy but intact. The roses were bent but survived, and the chickens were safe. Samuel looked around at the three sisters, wet and tired but smiling despite the rain, and he realized something profound. This place had found life again because of them. The following days brought another challenge, though a quieter one. Word of the sisters' presence had spread further in town, and a few local officials came by, curious about the arrangement. They asked questions, their voices polite but firm, about the legality of three young women living and working on Samuel's ranch. Samuel stood tall, unwavering. "They're here to work," he explained. "They are doing honest work, helping me maintain the ranch. That's all there is to it." The officials seemed surprised by his calm, straightforward answers. After a long discussion, they left, apparently satisfied, but Samuel knew it wasn't over. People would continue to watch, to question, to whisper. Back at the ranch, he shared this with the sisters. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll keep going as we always have. They may ask questions, but we know the truth. That's all that matters." Naya nodded. "We trust you, Samuel. That's enough for us." It was moments like this that made Samuel understand the depth of their connection. They had come to his ranch out of necessity, and yet, through hard work, patience, and kindness, they had become an inseparable part of his life. He realized that family didn't always come from blood. Sometimes it came from shared experiences, mutual respect, and a willingness to care for one another. As summer turned into early fall, the ranch thrived in ways it hadn't in years. The horses were healthy, the garden was blooming, and the house was clean and warm. The sisters had learned the routines of the ranch, and Samuel had learned to rely on them in ways he hadn't anticipated. One evening, as they all sat by the porch watching the sunset, Samuel looked at the sisters and said quietly, "You've changed my life. I didn't know how lonely I was until you came here. You've given this place and me a second chance." Naya smiled softly, her eyes shining in the last light of the day. "And you've given us a home, Samuel. We didn't ask for much, just a chance. You gave us more than that." Samuel felt a lump in his throat, a mix of pride, gratitude, and a little sadness for the years lost to loneliness. But in that moment, with the wind blowing softly through the fields and the three sisters laughing quietly nearby, he knew everything would be all right. The ranch was no longer just a piece of land. It was a place of hope, warmth, and trust, and Samuel, who had once thought he would live out his days in quiet solitude, realized that life could surprise you in the most beautiful ways. He also knew there would be more challenges ahead. Gossip might continue, questions might arise, and people might not understand their bond, but he was ready for whatever came, because together they were stronger than any misunderstanding or prejudice. Together, they had built something far more valuable than just a ranch. They had built a family. The cool winds of autumn rolled across the valley, carrying the scent of dry leaves and soil. The summer storms had passed, leaving the land refreshed and golden. Samuel often sat on his porch in the evenings, sipping his coffee as the orange sky turned purple. He could hear laughter from the kitchen, the sound of the sisters cooking and teasing each other as they worked. The ranch had never felt more alive. Every fence was mended, the garden was blooming, and the horses were stronger than ever. The once lonely house now echoed with voices, footsteps, and the warmth of shared meals. For Samuel, it was like waking up from a long, dreamless sleep. One chilly morning, Naya brought him a bowl of oatmeal, smiling. "You've been working too hard," she said. "You should eat before you go fix those fence posts." Samuel chuckled. "If I don't work, this place will fall apart again." She shook her head. "You've already done enough. Let us do the rest." He looked at her, really looked, and realized how much they had done in just a few months. These young women had turned a forgotten ranch into a home. He nodded softly. "All right," he said. "We'll share the work." Life carried on peacefully for a while, but small-town whispers have a way of growing louder when left alone. One afternoon, a truck rolled up the dirt road leading to the ranch. The sound of its tires crunching against gravel broke the calm. Samuel came out to the porch wiping his hands on his shirt and saw two men in county uniforms step out. They introduced themselves politely, Mr. Harris and Deputy Cole, both from the local county office. "Mr. Dwyer," Harris said, adjusting his hat. "We've had some questions raised about the people working here. We just wanted to make sure everything's proper." Samuel's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice stayed calm. "You're welcome to ask whatever you need." The men exchanged glances. "These young women," Harris continued, "they're not from around here, are they? You're aware that folks are concerned about whether they're here legally, whether they have the right to work?" Samuel folded his arms. "They came here needing help. They've been working hard, earning their keep. Everything they've done is honest work. There's nothing improper about it." The deputy looked past him toward the barn where Naya and her sisters were cleaning tools. "We're not accusing anyone, sir," Cole said gently. "But you know how some people talk. We just need to be sure everything's in order." Samuel met his eyes. "You've known me my whole life, deputy. Have I ever done anything dishonest?" The deputy hesitated. "No, sir. You haven't." "Then you can tell anyone who asks," Samuel said, his tone firm but steady, "that these women are under my protection, and they're doing nothing wrong. They've worked hard, respected the land, and made this ranch better than it's been in years. That's the truth." There was silence for a moment. The men nodded slowly, sensing the finality in his words. Harris cleared his throat. "All right, Mr. Dwyer. We'll note that everything seems fine here." As they left, Samuel turned to see Naya standing a few feet away, holding a cloth in her hands. She had overheard most of the conversation. Her eyes were calm, but there was sadness in them too. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "We didn't mean to bring you trouble." Samuel shook his head. "Don't you ever apologize for being here. You've brought nothing but good to this place. Let them talk. They don't know what we know." That evening, the air felt heavier than usual. The sisters cooked dinner as always, but there was a quietness in the kitchen that hadn't been there before. Even Lona's usual laughter was softer. Samuel tried to lighten the mood, telling an old story about his father losing a cow in a snowstorm and finding it 2 days later in the neighbor's yard. It earned a few smiles, but everyone could feel the weight of the day lingering. Later, after dinner, Naya stepped outside and stood near the garden. The moonlight touched her face, and Samuel joined her after a moment. "You're worried," he said gently. She nodded. "I've seen this before. People fear what they don't understand. Sometimes, no matter how kind you are, it doesn't matter." Samuel sighed. "Maybe so, but kindness still matters to me. And as long as I'm breathing, no one's turning you away from this place." She looked at him with quiet gratitude. "You remind me of our father," she said softly. "He used to say that people who have lost much often learn how to give more." Samuel didn't know what to say to that. The words touched him more deeply than she probably realized. He looked up at the stars, remembering the long, silent nights he'd spent alone after Clara's passing. Maybe this moment, this family, was life's way of giving something back. The next few weeks passed with a strange mix of peace and tension. The townsfolk still whispered, but fewer dared to confront Samuel directly. Some even began to notice how well the ranch was doing again. A few travelers stopped by for horse feed or to trade goods, and they left with good words about the sisters, their kindness, their manners, and the way the ranch felt welcoming again. One Sunday, to everyone's surprise, Mrs. Jensen herself came out to visit. She brought a basket of apples and a polite smile. "I thought I'd see how you were doing, Sam," she said, glancing curiously at the sisters as they worked nearby. Samuel invited her to sit on the porch. "Doing fine," he said simply. Mrs. Jensen looked around at the clean yard, the blooming garden, and the painted fences. "You've done wonders with this place," she admitted. "Not me," Samuel said, smiling faintly. "Them." Naya approached politely, greeting her with a nod. Mrs. Jensen hesitated, then offered one of the apples from her basket. "You've kept him in good company," she said with a small smile. Naya accepted the apple with both hands. "He's kept us safe," she replied. It was a simple exchange, but something changed that day. Mrs. Jensen returned to town with a different story, not one of suspicion, but of respect. Slowly, people began to talk less and observe more. The story of the old rancher and the 3 Apache sisters softened into something else. A quiet tale of kindness and gratitude. Winter began to whisper through the valley soon after. The sisters helped Samuel prepare for the cold, stacking firewood, covering the stables, and storing food. The nights grew longer, but inside the ranch there was warmth. They spent evenings around the fireplace, talking and sharing stories. One night, as the wind howled outside, Samuel looked at the sisters sitting by the fire, their faces glowing in the flickering light. He thought of how far they had all come. The loneliness that once filled the house had vanished completely. In its place was laughter, belonging, and something even deeper, family. But deep down, Samuel knew that peace was something you had to guard. He had seen how fragile good things could be. He made a quiet promise to himself that night, that no matter what anyone said or did, he would protect this small world they had built together. When he went to bed that night, he paused at the door and looked back at them one last time. Lona was sewing, humming softly. Tika was oiling a saddle, and Naya was staring into the fire, lost in thought. Samuel smiled to himself. For the first time in years, he felt complete, not because of what he had, but because of who he had beside him. The next morning, he rose before dawn and wrote something on a small piece of wood. He hung it on the front gate for anyone passing by to see. The words were simple: let them in, always. He didn't explain it to anyone, not even the sisters, but deep in his heart he knew what it meant. A reminder to himself and to the world that kindness was worth the risk, that compassion was never a mistake, and that sometimes the people you let in can save you in ways you never expected. The sign swayed gently in the wind as the sun rose over the desert, glowing against the sky. And on that quiet morning, the old rancher smiled, knowing that his home, once silent and empty, had finally found its soul again. Winter had passed, and the valley slowly awoke to the first signs of spring. The crisp air carried the scent of new growth, and the once dry fields were turning green again. The ranch, which had once been quiet and empty, now thrived under the care of Samuel and the three sisters. Horses grazed peacefully, the garden bloomed with roses and fresh vegetables, and the house felt alive with warmth and laughter. Samuel moved with a slower rhythm now, his steps careful but steady. Age had begun to make itself felt, though his mind remained sharp and his spirit strong. He had spent years working the land alone, but the presence of Naya, Tika, and Lona had changed everything. The ranch no longer felt like a place of solitude. It was a home, full of life, and it was all because of them. The sisters continued to rise early, tending to their daily chores without complaint. Naya managed the house and kitchen. Tika maintained the fences and tools, and Lona cared for the smaller animals, often singing to them softly. Samuel watched them from the porch, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. They had become more than helpers. They were family, and they had given him more than companionship. They had restored his faith in the beauty of everyday life. One afternoon, Samuel decided to take a walk through the valley. He leaned on his walking stick as he surveyed the land. He remembered the long years of silence and loneliness, the nights spent thinking of Clara, and the heavy weight of loss. But now, he thought, life had given him a second chance, a chance to love, to care, and to be cared for in return. When he returned to the ranch, he found Naya sitting on the porch steps, sketching in a notebook. Tika and Lona were nearby, working with baskets of freshly picked vegetables. Samuel approached quietly, not wanting to disturb the moment. "You've all done wonders," he said softly, sitting down beside Naya. "This place, it feels like it's alive again. It's all because of you." Naya smiled, setting down her pencil. "We just wanted to help, Samuel. We never imagined it would mean so much to you." He shook his head. "It's not just about help. You've given me something I thought was lost forever. Family, purpose, and hope. You've made this old man's life meaningful again." Their eyes met, and in that simple exchange there was a silent understanding. Life had a way of bringing people together in unexpected ways, and Samuel knew he had been blessed by their presence. As the seasons changed, the ranch continued to flourish. Travelers and neighbors began to notice the transformation. The whispers in town softened, replaced by curiosity and admiration. People spoke of the ranch of kindness and how the three sisters, along with the elderly rancher, had breathed new life into the land. Samuel often reflected on how much the sisters had taught him. Patience, resilience, and humility were lessons he had learned from them in ways he never expected. They had shown him that strength was not just in physical labor but in kindness, generosity, and quiet determination. One morning, Samuel woke feeling weaker than usual. He tried to rise from his bed but found that his body would not cooperate. Concerned, the sisters gathered around him, helping him carefully to the porch where the morning sun could warm him. Lona held a cloth to his forehead while Tika fetched warm tea and Naya gently guided him into a chair. "I'll be all right," Samuel said with a faint smile, though the weariness in his voice betrayed him. "Don't worry about me." Naya shook her head. "We won't leave your side, Samuel. You've given us everything. Now it's our turn to care for you." Over the next few weeks, Samuel's strength gradually declined. The sisters took turns tending to him, ensuring he was comfortable and had everything he needed. They cooked his favorite meals, sang softly by his bedside, and shared stories of their childhood to lift his spirits. Samuel felt a profound sense of gratitude. He realized that life had come full circle. He had once protected and nurtured them, and now they were protecting and nurturing him. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Samuel called Naya to his side. "I want you to promise me something," he said, his voice soft but steady. Naya knelt beside him. "Anything, Samuel. Promise me that you'll keep this ranch alive," he said. "Promise me you'll care for it, the animals, and each other. Let it be a home for anyone who needs it, just as you've been a home for me." Tears welled in Naya's eyes. "I promise, Samuel. We will keep it safe and we will honor you every day." He smiled, feeling a deep peace settle within him. For the first time in a long while, he felt that everything was as it should be. A few days later, Samuel passed quietly in his sleep, surrounded by the warmth and love of the three sisters. Though the loss was profound, there was also a sense of fulfillment. He had lived a life of hard work, solitude, and quiet reflection, and in the end he had found family, purpose, and peace. After his passing, the sisters gathered to honor him. They held a small ceremony in the garden where the roses bloomed, each flower a symbol of life, care, and remembrance. They shared stories of his kindness, his wisdom, and his quiet courage. Though the town had once questioned their presence, now they spoke of Samuel with respect, acknowledging the legacy he had left behind. The sisters took over the ranch, continuing Samuel's work with the same dedication and love. They cared for the land, tended the animals, and welcomed travelers who passed by, offering meals and shelter to those in need. The small wooden sign Samuel had hung on the gate, "Let them in always," remained there, a testament to his belief in kindness and trust. Years passed, and the ranch became known as a place of hope and warmth. People came from near and far to see the thriving land, the blooming gardens, and the harmony between the sisters and the animals. The story of Samuel and the three Apache sisters was told and retold, not as a tale of wealth or power, but as a story of compassion, resilience, and the quiet strength of human connection. Naya, Tika, and Lona never forgot Samuel's lessons. They honored him in every choice they made, every seed they planted, and every visitor they welcomed. His presence lingered in the laughter that echoed across the porch, in the careful tending of the garden, and in the shared meals that brought everyone together. One spring morning, Naya stood by the gate watching the sun rise over the hills. She thought of Samuel and smiled softly. "You gave us a home and we will make sure it lives on," she whispered. Tika joined her, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables. "He believed in us when no one else did," she said. Lona came out from the barn, brushing her hands on a cloth. "And we will never forget him," she added. Together, the three sisters looked over the ranch, now alive and thriving. It was a place where the past and the present merged, a land that had once been lonely and quiet now filled with laughter, life, and love. The story of Samuel Dwyer and the three Apache sisters became more than a tale of survival or hard work. It became a lesson for everyone who heard it, that kindness can transform lives, that trust can create family, and that even in the most unexpected circumstances, people can find hope, purpose, and belonging. The ranch remained a sanctuary for many years, and the roses Samuel had loved continued to bloom, vibrant and strong, just like the bonds he had helped nurture. Travelers who came to the ranch spoke of the quiet old man who had opened his gate to strangers, and how those strangers had become his family. It was a story told with awe and gratitude, reminding everyone who heard it that even the simplest acts of compassion can leave a lasting legacy. As the sun set each day over the valley, The ranch glowed with warmth and peace, and somewhere in the gentle wind that swept across the fields, it felt as if Samuel was still there, smiling, watching over the land and the family he had chosen. The legacy of his kindness lived on, carried in the hearts of Naya, Tika, and Lona, and in every life they touched along the way. And so, the once lonely rancher's story became a story of life renewed, of love and care that outlived even death, and of the unbreakable bonds formed when people open their hearts, trust one another, and choose compassion above fear. The ranch continued to thrive, and the small wooden sign on the gate swayed gently in the breeze. Its simple message standing the test of time, let them in, always. It was a promise, a reminder, and above all a legacy of hope.